topology for allowing various IV&V applications to talk to each other, different databases, different user interfaces, and it has a common interface for allowing those to talk to each other. The AWB, when you hear about it, is a Eclipse user interface that makes use of the AMF underneath it as an example of how one might take advantage of it. So Neal and I are going to give you an introduction to what the AMF is about. Okay, let me go over the. You want to take a problem space? Yeah.
Okay, so being good business engineer, one of the first things we try to do is separate the problem space from the solution space. And for the problem space, to Travis Dawson, who's this great little allegory of the app. Around IV&V, we use a lot of different terms to describe applications. Some types of tools, some types of utilities, some programs. So basically, when we talk about an app, we're really talking about any bundle of data being presented. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be in some sort of web page, like a Jira page. Could be a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, or it could be one of the databases that we made similar to for the Mars Science Laboratory project. We made a special database maintained all of our analysis work. But these are all have certainly all been attacked. All of them had a single purpose, one app doing one thing. But it encapsulated the data into the app. So the problem anybody else wanted to use that data, they had to find a way of extracting that app. So over time, different projects have different ways of extracting information from one source, say a Word document, put into another, say an Excel spreadsheet, into a database. And even though it's all written in the same common language, the data made it impossible for one to be able to translation process. That's fine if you've got 3 different apps that draw off of each other. Write custom interfaces for each of them. The problem is we're dealing with lots of things. So the problem is we want to get data from one source so that it can be presented in any source. So that is the problem when we start working on the analysis management framework.
We'll talk a little bit about what the AMF is at this point. This is the concept when the AMF CB Initiative was approved for FY13. It's providing a program evidence-based assurance capability. We have a way of capturing evidence, tying it to artifacts regardless of what source they came from, like Neal was saying, and providing our arguments with them and tying them to a claim, so you can navigate that web of information. It's taking framework. One of the goals in this was to, not come up with something new, but use some well-established standard practices, and 3-tier architectures are pretty common out there. Also, MSL already use this approach to some degree. So we were going to leverage some of the things that they had learned. And along the way, best practices like recognizing patterns and reusing them, and similar type of software functions, like supporting the most common denominator platforms. We've got an Eclipse version, MS Office version, and a XML version, which covers a vast majority of the platforms that we're going to have to deal with. So as we've said earlier, providing a framework that organizes the information that we have, gives us a common way to communicate it. Not only common via user interfaces, but a common way of sharing data between applications. One of the things that you'll see with the AMF is that it has 3 layers: a user layer, a business layer, and then the data implementation layer. That business layer in the middle provides the language that all of these applications talk to each other with. And we wrote one business layer for each of the platforms, and you can even reuse it with multiple tools. And by using the same best practices and the same design behind all 3 of them, it makes it very easy to move data between the various tools we have to work with here at IV&V. The first thing that we did as part of the initiative was create a domain model, which represented the type of work that IV&V does. The items that we found in the domain model at a very high level is quite simple. Artifacts are things that we look at to evaluate. Anything that we look at is an artifact. It could be code, it could be design, it could be a model, it could be a document, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be a plan. They're all artifacts that we look at to evaluate. And then we have assessment, which is basically the analysis work that we do. It could be the notes that we took in doing the assessment, our homework. It could be an issue. It could be a risk. Anything that we produce is an assessment. And then we have actions. It could be a plan for an action. It could be a template like catalog of methods, or it could actually be an assignment given to a particular analyst to perform against a specific project. By standardizing the way these talk to each other, we have an improved communication internally and externally, because we can talk about them using the same terms, and we don't have to argue about that terminology. At least we know what our terminology of IV&V is as we move forward with the tools. So one of the key things in tier architecture, as I said earlier, and Neal's going to explain what our tiers are.
So actually, coming from a web development base, entry architecture is just sort of a normal way of doing things. If you're a company and you have a website for e-commerce, if you use a tiered strategy, you can easily take the data that you're gathering on your e-commerce site. You take the operations that you're performing on that e-commerce site, and when Apple comes out with an iPhone, you simply write an app to it. You're using the same data and operations. You're just using a different display platform. That's the whole idea behind this M-tier architecture. As Don said, there are many different implementations of it. You go online, you can just find and type in M-tier architecture, and you find all sorts of examples of that. So back to our problem. We have all these apps, and we want them to be able to share data with each other, but right now it entails writing custom interfaces for each of them. So the idea is this layer in that handles common functionality that can draw data from the data sources, put it into a form an object model, and then present that to the user interface layer at the top. And here's a simplified version of that. And I'll go over each of the different layers. The user interface layer is a public-facing layer. It's the one that, if you were an analyst or a manager, you call up and this is what you would see. You would see the forms, the web pages, the spreadsheet, the document. Whatever. It's what you're actually looking at. So we break down which is like the AWB or the MSL analysis tool that we wrote. Smart would be another example of an analyst tool. And a couple years ago, there was an attempt at something called the artifact mapping tool, which would have a similar type of thing. Management reports. If you've ever been on the website, you have to generate different reports at different times for both internal and external audiences. Those are usually going to be Word documents. And then presentations. We all know about making PowerPoints and presenting them for workshops or for other types of checkpoint reviews. So business lines where actually a lot of this stuff is going on. This is what we've been concentrating on in the past year, where you have both business objects and business entities. Business objects and the business objects tend to be the encapsulation of the operations of the business. They don't tend to have content in and of themselves, as opposed to the business entities, which are the actual concrete things that you're talking about. So at this point, our business entities are the artifacts that John mentioned, which is what the IV&V analyst is actually looking at and making some sort of judgment about, and that judgment we'll call an assessment. Then the actions projects. Originally, we had written a lot of the stuff for just to do a single project. As the concept expanded, we realized that we could use this for the whole program. So a project, we needed to create a project object to represent the individual projects where all this other data was being collected. And then the participants, that's you and I and all the other people who were out there. It could be an analyst, it could be a manager, but it could also be the author of the document from the project point of view. And here's some artifacts. I don't know if you can read those, but well, I could if I could read.
Generic, top level, middle, requirement, design, release, dictionary, data drop, document, section, folder, implementation, interface, standard, capability, and smart requirement type.
That's not an exhaustive list. Each project can set up whatever type of artifacts they're going to be dealing with and define them. These are some of the ones we've dealt with out of the box. It's actually probably got about 8 more on there now. We're including code analysis as well. Okay, thank you. Yeah, this isn't an exhaustive list, and you don't have to have this list. Each project can define their own list of artifacts that they're going to be dealing with, These are predefined, so it makes sense for projects when they're getting set up to look at them and consider reusing them or modifying what's out there. But if you don't find something that meets your need, you can certainly develop your own artifacts and add them to the list. And one of the things about the AMF is it is built for expandability and customization. And the one thing that we really heavily architected into it is the fact that we don't want to make any assumptions about anybody's work out there. So you do have a lot of options when you're dealing with it. If you build on other people's work, you'll have a better time of it. But you can also blaze your own trail if you have a good idea.
So our assessment types. Generic, semantic, requirement, design, test, risk, issue, observation, review, comment, top level. These are the activities that the analysts tend to do. I don't know if they're including things like tech reviews, arguments. Yeah. So this has also been a list that's been expanded over time. Sure.
Inside of the management, you have a, and actually, you come to either Zach or Jeremy's presentation this afternoon. Jeremy's going to show how he configured his project to use the AMF, and Zach is going to go through the user interface he uses as a day-to-day analyst. So we have a session on a day in the life of the analyst, and then a day in the life of a lead analyst type of thing later on. It shows how those were put together. Quite simply, all you need to do for an assessment is basic information that's captured. Built into this is tracking who's worked on it, when was it updated. It has an internal ID so that you can uniquely identify it. It allows you to track an external ID if you have to interact with something like, say, Orbit or Compass or some other system. It allows you to set up and define your hierarchy so that one of the examples you'll see is that we have the top levels signal a UI that wants to interact with it. And like you said, the AWB is just one UI that interacts with it. It says, these are the things we want you to display first. So start here and then start working through the tree. So on the project we're going to look at later, you'll see that the top levels are tech reference, assurance claims, and issues. So that if you open those folders, you'll see issues grouped by severity or a list of high-level claims you're making. And the claims, the way we did it at least, are very similar to the 09-1 framework items that we're trying to check. So we'll make a claim about requirements, and then we'll make a claim about each requirement document and each level of that. And then we'll tie into the requirements, and when we do design analysis, we will add the design as further evidence that the requirement's being followed or is not being followed at that point. And when we get code, we'll add a trace to the code as well. We'll say this is where it was implemented in the code, and we have a way of marking the code so that we can say it's right here in the code. So we can actually highlight the lines where we feel it's being satisfied. That's both assessment and artifacts in that picture, but that's kind of how we organize the data and work with it. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes. That's an accurate statement, yes. You're ready to teach the next one for us, Sam.
And action types would be more something that a manager would use as far as being able to make assignments to two different analysts as to what type of assessment, which types of assessments they want them to do to what type of artifacts. So it's sort of a high level way of tying together assessment activities with various artifacts that we see. And the data layer is actually where all the individual components are stored for permanent retrieval. We basically divided them into three different categories. Project artifacts, which we sort of want to leave in the state that we receive them as much as possible. That we store them, and if we can store them in the way that they came to us, say Doors database, we prefer to do that. The analysis repositories are usually SQL-based databases. Some projects use Access, some projects use SQL Server. You could use Doors. Just where you keep your analysis activities, the records of it. It could be just simply a set of Excel spreadsheets that you keep on ECM. And then issues database, the one we all use here at the NASA IV&V is Orbit. You could be using other agencies might be using Jira or some other issue tracking system. So this was our original plan for implementation, which we're working on and we're finishing up because the fiscal year is about to end. At the bottom, we based it on SQL Server, Doors, Orbit, Excel, and then Word/PDFs as far as what the artifacts that we would get in for different projects. The business layer, we chose to implement it in these three languages first. Java, because that's what Eclipse is written in. That's Don and Tom had already started writing different plugins for their project for the AWB. So Java was a natural one. VBA, since that's running under almost every, well, I mean, all the Office products, so that transfer between the various Microsoft Office products could be facilitated. And XML, we haven't used it much this year, but for any web-based applications that anybody would like to make, having an XML schema to work off of would be very useful. So at the user interface level, Don has the AWB, and you'll be hearing more about that in other presentations. Then we wanted to make sure that we could do both extraction and report writing in Word, in Excel, and in PowerPoint. So we use the VBA under that to be able to extract data out of those sources and then present them into it.
So that was quite a bit of information on N-tier architectures and the 3-tier architecture that we're using, which is a common practice. Another common practice is domain modeling, and that's what we did to help define these various objects that we're working with in the 3 platforms that Neal was just talking about. Domain model, it's a conceptual model of all the topics related to a specific problem. In our case, that problem is IV&V. It's not a model of what a project's doing. Our domain model is a model of what IV&V is doing. So that was our problem space, so that we can do a better job in IV&V. It talks about the various IV&V entities and attributes that are out there, their roles and relationships. It's a industry standard practice. I don't go into a lot of discussion about what a problem domain is and what domain modeling is, because there are probably millions of hits on Google if you go out there and search for domain model. You can find out about it. Some other terms that you might hear for domain modeling, you might hear problem domain, or domain layer. They're all talking about the concept of domain modeling. And usually, it's represented using a UML class diagram. And in our solution with AMF, the business layer is our domain model for doing IV&V. And that's why, as we implemented not only in Java, but then in VBA and then in XML, it became quicker and quicker to implement these, because we already had done the domain modeling. We already knew what the problem was that the software had to solve, and we had done it once with Java. So then we did it again with VBA exactly the same way, with exactly the same domain model. And then again in XML with exactly the same domain model. It became easier and easier to do it. By the way, for the MS Office environment with the VBA, there are libraries for each of the tools with the data and the UI layer. But the domain layer, the business layer, there is only one set of code, and that code can be used in Access, in Word, in Excel, in PowerPoint, in MS Project. You can reuse those libraries to represent IV&V entities in any of those Office products to move data between them. So it's quite helpful. We started in Word, which is probably the most difficult product to start with. When we went to Excel, we enjoyed it so much more and learned a lot. And then we went back to Word and cleaned up what we had done in Word, and it became a lot easier to work with Word once we had a fleshed out domain model, because we didn't have to solve those problems again. We could just reuse what had grown through our use in the other products. One of my college interns made the statement to me. He goes, "Why didn't you push me harder to use the domain model in Word the first time?" And I said, "Well, I did, but you didn't get it till you used it in Excel." So here's a very simple domain model. There's several domain models. There's a document that's delivered as part of the project called the AMF architecture and design document. It has section 4 is the domain model, and it has several subsections. This here is the project domain. As we mentioned, they're the project, the artifact, assessment, action domains. And the thought here is, takeaway is, we generally define what a project is, that it's composed of participants. It has a list of valid elements that they've defined for the project, and it assigns participants to the project from a pool of multiple projects, and they get assigned roles. And participants can have more than one role on the project, depending on how robust you want to define that. The other thing that you have here is across bottom there, the first box, is the artifact types, and that's a list of all the valid artifacts you can find for the project. We had that sample list earlier that we were looking at. That's what was defined for one particular project. This tells us what's valid to use when we're validating our IV&V data internally. And then you have the artifacts that are of that type assigned to this. And pattern reuse, same assessment types and assessment states. That's a new thing we introduced. And the assessments for the project. And then the same thing for action types and actions. So you state ahead of time what you want to use on your particular project, and then you can add them once they're listed as a valid type. I think I had a couple of hidden slides I lost. The other thing that we do as a pattern is we have a trace pattern, which has become very important and powerful for us. By using a base artifact class, a base assessment class, and a base action class, we have defined an artifact trace, an assessment trace, and an action trace. And for instance, an artifact trace, an artifact can use that trace to another artifact. An assessment can use that trace to an artifact that it's assessing or using as evidence for an argument. And an action can be traced to an artifact using an artifact trace in order to assign it to somebody or define, what method's going to be applied to that artifact. And the nice thing about this, the way this works out is the artifact trace is defined once and then reused. Assessments, actions, and artifacts all use an artifact trace. They all use an assessment and an action trace as well. But that's how we're able to link all this data together is by reusing that trace pattern between these. Wanted to thank a few people who have been guinea pigs for the AMF or supporters of the AMF or testers of the AMF. These are some of the individuals that have cut their teeth with it in their projects or by coming to a user group meeting or participating in sharing code or just testing out things that we want to try. That's anything else you want to add? Okay, there's two presentations this after. The first one's from an analyst point of view. The second one's from a project lead point of view. Tomorrow, there's gritty detail on how to use it inside of MS Office, and then if you want a better look at the architecture, that'll be on Thursday. They were supposed to. They weren't supposed to be part. That was from a previous presentation. No, I was expecting some other slides out there. One of them was a slide. That's what I. That's probably my fault. Any other questions? We'll be in the Q&A.
Presentation. It'll be in the breakout room if